subtitles running. Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 11th of November 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
An incredible piece of news this morning. The news was breaking earlier today, and that is that James Le Mesurier, the founder of the White Helmets, has been found dead. The circumstances, Patrick, are a bit confused still at the moment. It seems that varying reports that he was either found at the bottom of, underneath a balcony at his home or close to a mosque. One report I saw said that he had some kind of slash damage to his cheek and also broken hands and feet. But at this point, it's pretty unclear exactly what happened to him. So this was the first Oz Chatterjee this morning on Twitter saying, "It's with deeply heavy heart that I do this, but I can confirm that my friend James Le Mesurier, founder of Mayday Rescue and White Helmets fame, died at his home in Istanbul last night." Now I'm putting that up because some of the responses underneath said this. Now Chatterjee didn't say anything about the possibility of foul play. But certainly some of the comments underneath saying, asking that question, was he murdered? And somebody saying it seems that way, yes. So let's come back to the UK then, and Mark Urban. And he had this to say: that Syria civil defence founder James Le Mesurier has died after falling from his flat in Istanbul. I know the flat well, a former colleague tells me. It's not possible to fall from that balcony. He suspects possible state involvement. And he followed up that tweet with this: "I have no idea whether Le Mesurier was once in MI6 before, and I don't think I ever met him, but it will now fall to Turkey to conduct a thorough investigation in order to ascertain whether there was state involvement and the info campaign against him was a prelude to murder." So pretty clear that there's a narrative there beginning to be built. First of all, the possibility of state interference here, and also the narrative that the information campaign against him was a prelude to murder. And of course there he's referring to many of the alternative media organizations that have been focused on the White Helmets in the last several years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I believe he deleted these initial tweets, didn't he? There's quite a few.
We'll come on to that, yes. Yeah. So he did indeed delete those initial tweets, and he followed up with this. He said, "I've deleted a strand about the unexplained death of Syria civil defence founder James Le Mesurier in Istanbul. Shorter version: there's a good deal of suspicion it may be murder by a state actor, but others suggest he may have taken his own life. I will pick up as it clarifies." And basically what that's about is some comments from the Turkish police that in fact Le Mesurier had been taking antidepressants recently, and so there is some speculation that he may have taken his own life as well. So it's all very confused picture at the moment, but nonetheless a pretty significant event because of course this guy highly significant in the whole Syria propaganda machine.
And I might add as well, Mark Urban, isn't he the journalist who managed to secure some kind of an exclusive interview with Sergei Skripal just months before the Skripal incident. And he's also, I believe, has a history with Skripal's alleged handler, Pablo Miller. Is that right?
I believe that's true. Now, just coming back to this earlier tweet, which is to say he did delete the first sentence of this: "I've no idea whether Le Mesurier was once MI6. And I don't think I ever met him." That's quite an interesting sentence because the implication there is that he has met people in MI6 at very least. And as you say, he did interview Skripal just a few months before Skripal was poisoned.
Yeah, I think it was 6 months or a year before.
Yes, absolutely. And so he clearly had connections amongst that MI6 group that was handling Sergei Skripal at the time. So what Mark Urban...
It's interesting that Urban is running point on this. He's the first person that I believe you've seen who's actually commenting on this right now in the British sphere of things, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yes.
it's very interesting.
So we will keep people informed on this story as it develops, but clearly significant with respect to Syria and Britain's involvement in Syria, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a lot of money has been spent on the white helmets by the Foreign Office, by USAID, by the EU, by various governments, including the Netherlands, Germany, and so many different states have pitched in to this slush fund for the white helmets. It's been going since, I believe, late 2013. And total income for that group, I believe it's well in excess of $150 million, probably more closer to $200 million that's gone into their sort of account. And the most recent contribution from the United States, an extra $4.5 million by the Trump administration for the white helmets, who actually don't operate anywhere in Syria except for the Al-Qaeda occupied province of Idlib, which is yet to be liberated by the Syrian government and the Syrian national military forces. So it's interesting. So the white helmets effectively don't exist anymore in Syria, but yet they're still collecting money from various governments, which is interesting.
Absolutely. Okay, now let's move on to Bolivia, Patrick.
Well, the news yesterday was shocking but not surprising. There was, by anyone's estimation, a coup which took place in Bolivia. Here's President Evo Morales at a press conference which he gave. You can actually watch the full press conference up on Rupply. It's up on YouTube right now. And basically, President Evo Morales has resigned, and he's resigned apparently under duress, we're told. And he denounces a coup attempt, and he's urging the people mobilize on a constitutional basis, in other words, to exert their constitutional rights. His implication here is that this was a breach of constitutional regulations and rules with regard to the election, that he did win the election by a 10% margin, thus avoiding a runoff from his closest competitor, Carlos Mesa. So that's Evo Morales, and it's been quite ugly, actually, but it's something that we weren't actually surprised about. We ran this story a few days ago, early in the week. U.S. plotting new coup d'etat to oust Bolivian President Evo Morales. And I must say, when I posted this on social media, I was attacked by a number of troll accounts. It was absolutely incredible how fast they mobilized within the comment threads. And I have not seen anything as efficient as this, except for commenting on Saudi Arabian issues with regards to kind of online influencers, or you could call them trolls. So Evo Morales was warning that there was a coup in progress earlier in the week. And sure enough, it happened. So this, I think right now, we want to try to break down how the sort of steps that came into place before the events this weekend. So we're going to give you a little step-by-step guide to regime change and show you how it was done in this case. So this is our regime change guide to Bolivia. Step 1, U.S.-backed social media influence campaigns. I just mentioned this before a minute ago, but if we go back one step, if we can possibly, this was the first account was going to show is Free Hong Kong. Free Hong Kong. These are the accounts that are coming in to attack anybody supporting Evo Morales or anybody calling this a coup. These are the sort of accounts that are coming in, sort of people who have been campaigning for the Hong Kong riots, etc. So there's no surprise there, but we'll go a little further and it gets even more interesting. Here's another account basically that uses the Pepe meme, which I was going to show, but the slide for some reason didn't come up. I have no idea why, which is kind of strange. But here's step 2. This is Smart Power NGO activism. And this is Ken Roth, Human Rights Watch, an important step against the disturbing tendency of leaders with dismissing popularity diminishing popularity to steal elections to secure a new term. So that's Ken Roth, and you can see his tweet here. Basically, he's saying that Evo Morales is blaming foreign powers coups on regime change, etc., in order to sort of offset his diminishing popularity. This is according to Ken Roth. This is the head of Human Rights Watch. This is somebody who is pro-regime change, who's advocating for regime change in Syria actively, and he's meant to be the head of a human rights organization. So this is what you call smart power. This is NGOs running influence campaigns here. And so just to continue with this, to show you another aspect of this, this was a campaign run against Bolivia over this summer. And this is one of the articles from The Independent. The world believes the Amazon is in trouble because of Bolsonaro. No, instead they should look at Bolivia. So basically, this is the mainstream media running a PR campaign across multiple outlets, blaming Bolivia for the Amazon rainforest fires over the summer. And what people will say, what does this exactly mean? The Amazon is burning and everybody is looking to Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. They should be looking a little further south, says Harriet Marsden from The Independent here. And basically, a pan-Amazon organization has accused both Morales and Bolsonaro of environmental genocide. So this is what the campaign is building up. Here you can see, and what it's going to culminate in is what we'll show you here. This was actually called out by this particular online media outlet, the Orinoco Tribune, and they're basically saying Western regime change operatives launch campaign to blame Bolivia's Evo Morales for Amazon fires. This is back in August. Okay. And look here. Well, what do you know? Actually, I was going to show you, there we are. Extinction Rebellion is the organization that is an environmental organization, and they were organizing a Bolivian protest in August in front of the Bolivian embassy. And this was designed to demonize the country of Bolivia and its leadership, Evo Morales. And so what was interesting about this is what you see in terms of splitting the left, splitting the anti-war movement or anti-imperialism movement. In this case, they're using the environmental issue to split any opposition to U.S. imperialism. So while this coup is taking place this last week, there wasn't a lot of pushback from international activists and anti-war activists, because a lot of them, especially those who support Extinction Rebellion, have already been conditioned to basically look badly on the government of Evo Morales. And similar influence campaigns have been done with Libya and Syria, using feminist outrage in Libya with the Viagra Gaddafi story, or the gay girl of Damascus in Syria, setting the LGBT community against the Syrian government and so forth, and basically more sympathetic towards regime change from Western progressives using political identity issues and progressive issues to split the anti-war left. So we're seeing this again. This is one of the reasons why there's very little political pushback from the so-called left in the West, is because of things just like what we're showing you here. So we continue on. Step 3, U.S.-backed opposition movement. Well, this is always something that you need. This was in our article. This is by Stephen Lenman, a great writer, who posted this earlier in the week. Leaked audios mention contacts between GOP hardliners, Republican hardliners, Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, as well as undemocratic Senator Bob Menendez, with Bolivian opposition leaders. So they also called for setting government buildings ablaze, organizing nationwide strikes, and other disruptive tactics right out of the CIA's playbook, including violent street protests. So that's the US-backed opposition there, the pro-democracy opposition. This is very similar to what we saw in Hong Kong. Arson, violent gangs of thugs attacking citizens, attacking anybody that's basically pushing back against what's going on in the street, sort of reactionary violence. And with the full backing of the U.S. State Department and all the U.S. organizations and, quote, pro-democracy organizations. But we go even further here. We can take this narrative just a bit further. And step 4, physical attacks on politicians. Well, this is quite disturbing. Here is one politician who was, they poured red paint over her. She's the mayor of a major city, and marched her through town barefoot, and basically kind of a Game of Thrones
It's very Game of Thrones, isn't
type
it?
situation.
Yeah.
And notice all the people who are frog marching her through town, they're all wearing masks. So everybody is masked, is covered up their faces so they can't be seen. And they say that they're doing this to avoid persecution from the dictator Evo Morales. Well, it's hard to square that sort of accusation when you look at scenes like this. These are absolutely right-wing fascist mobs, and they're using physical intimidation and physical violence against elected officials. So let's get a closer look here just so you can see. That is the mayor. Her name is Miss Guzman, and Patricia Guzman, and she was marched through the city by protesters, who the Western media are calling protesters, but really these are reactionary violent mobs who are getting the full backing from the United States. So step 5, buy off the police. Evo Morales warns of a coup as police across Bolivia mutiny and join, quote, protests. Now, mind you, if these protests were in the West, they would be calling these right-wing extremist mobs. But they're anti-government protesters in Libya, because it seems that our media want to see a regime change of government. It certainly looks like that from the coverage. So the police effectively have been bought off here. I think over time we're probably going to see and learn more about what went into this coup. But right now, all the people who are in the, quote, opposition, who have now taken power, are in denial that there's any U.S. involvement. And the U.S. is saying, oh, we're not involved, yet the evidence shows something completely different. So, and step 6, this is the most important step to finalize any military coup here. Basically, Bolivia's hardline socialist president, according to the Daily Mail, resigns after the nation's military chief said he should leave office following fraud allegations that marred elections. That's not true. The fraud allegations did not mar elections. Elections went as scheduled. So paying off military leaders, this is the final step for regime change. So Morales resigns after General Williams Kaliman said military chiefs warned him he should go. And Kaliman went on national TV on Sunday, yesterday, and said Morales must go to restore peace and stability for the good of Bolivia. And so Morales claims to have won a fourth term. This is the Daily Mail here. Claims to have won a fourth term last month, and that had triggered fraud allegations. And this is the most important thing here, and this is the part that people are missing. Kaliman stepped in within hours of Morales agreeing earlier in the day to hold new elections, and also to invite the European Union and the Organization for American States to come to Bolivia to verify election results. Basically inviting them to come in and check what's happened in the elections and do inspections and so forth, whatever election monitors do. As Morales did this, this is when the military stepped in. So the military clearly here, backed by the U.S., most likely paid off by the U.S., did not want to have an election runoff again. They moved in aggressively to shut it down, basically. So he clearly was threatened. According to him, he resigned under duress. Let's look at the statement by Morales. This is just afterwards at his press conference. My crime is to be indigenous, anti-imperialist, and socialist, but this doesn't end here, he says, the statement given after his forced resignation. He's the first indigenous president or leader of Bolivia, one of the first in South America, if you can believe that. He opposed U.S. intervention in Venezuela. I believe they did not recognize Israel or have diplomatic issues with Israel, as does Venezuela. And so there is accusations that by people on social media that it was Israeli involvement on some level in this overthrow. That's not been validated or verified, but those sort of accusations we saw as well with Venezuela. He's also presided over the most economically stable period in the country's history and the most politically stable period, with economic growth averaging 4% for the last 15 years. I mean, this is unheard of. So he was a socialist, yes, but he was also doing a hybrid of neoliberal economics and social programs. So he wasn't strictly a socialist, just as Venezuela is not a socialist country. It's a rampant capitalist country with social programs. But he's being branded as a communist dictator, basically by the opposition. So, but let's just remind people a little bit of history with regards to Bolivia. And these are the countries where the U.S. has attempted and successfully carried out coups of various descriptions here. Look, all of these countries, basically the whole of Central and South America, bar maybe a few. And so that's between 1948 and 2019. And Operation Condor was particularly brutal. The scars remain today. You can see the statistics here with regards to missing people. People have disappeared as U.S.-backed military or U.S.-backed fascist dictators have taken power after a successful coup d'etat. It's absolutely shocking. Chile, of course, stands out as one of the worst in this sort of tragedy. Of course, Argentina as well. The tragedy of the disappeared. And you have men like this, Oliver North, lauded as a hero in many circles in America, but he, of course, he was running CIA Contra cocaine for arms. Here he is, and under the Reagan administration. This is in Central America, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, those areas. So the history, the pedigree is there. It's undeniable for someone to say that the U.S. had no involvement in this coup in Bolivia, which has happened this week, it's really impossible to make that case. There was absolute U.S. involvement. It's obvious. It was open in some cases, and the evidence is there.
So yesterday, of course, was Remembrance Day, and everybody with their poppies on, remembering the fight against fascism during the Second World War, First World War, Second World War in particular. And yet, these free nations, the UK, the US, seem to be quite happy to deploy right-wing extreme fascists when they feel like regime change. I suppose you could say Ukraine is another example of that. And the media, they get absolute support from the media to push forward with this policy. It's somewhat hypocritical of the media to carry Remembrance Sunday stories on one hand and this on the other hand on the same page, effectively.
It is, and Ukraine's probably the most egregious example of that. This is basically a far-right neo-Nazi revival that's been backed and kind of shepherded along in the Ukraine since 2013, and it's unarmed. There's a paramilitary element to it. So this is a neo-Nazi movement, basically in Europe or on the fringe of Europe, with a paramilitary element to it, and with military backing from NATO member states. And not only that, then backing the political arms of those what are effectively fascist, street fascism, classic street fascism. This is what our governments have built. This is the genie that they've let out of the bottle, at least in Europe. And so what exactly are they doing in South America? The potential for reprisals and vengeance and violence, rounding up, quote, leftists. We're already seeing reports of this. So the retribution. So what's happened, I think, is if this was Morales' second term, he would probably be defiant. He'd be standing out on a balcony right now saying, you're going to have to drag me out. But because this is his fourth term, then I don't think the urgency is quite there. He's been caught by surprise. So has his supporters. They just assumed that the democratic result would hold and that they could sort of overcome U.S. or foreign intervention by democratic means. But that's not actually what happened. So this is an aggressive, violent, physical coup d'etat. And the U.S. is involved in backing all of these types of groups. Look at Hong Kong. I mean, those weren't peaceful democratic protesters at all. And the United States, the State Department, National Endowment for Democracy, they've been funding and backing these movements for years. So this particular operation in Bolivia is probably probably 10 years in the making, about 10 years in the making. And I don't know how much money the United States would have spent on NGOs and all the different programs, and then directly with sort of cash injections to certain people and organizations. But I'm sure it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars at least.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, let's move on then. If you like what the UK column does and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. There are various options for supporting us there. Now, today is, of course, Independence Day in Poland, and on this day in 1918, Mr. Duda was tweeting out earlier, after 123 years of non-existence, Poland regained her independence and reappeared on the map of Europe. Today, a strong and reliable NATO member, Poland contributes to the security and independence of our allies and partners. So happy Independence Day. So Poland, at least in Europe, in support of NATO, they say. Not so, as we mentioned last week, Mr. Macron. We're currently experiencing the brain death of NATO, is what he said. Now, the only mention of the general election on this news programme is going to be this article from The Guardian, saying that the Brexit Party is revving up for the election, expect to see a lot more of Farage. And well, Nigel Farage has decided to do a little bit of social media playing, and he was talking about NATO and Mr. Macron's comments from his battle bus on Friday. So let's just have a listen to what he said.
I'm also asked here on YouTube, I'm asked by James a question that really matters. Please, can you talk about the EU Defence Union? So overnight, President Macron has said, we can't rely on the Americans anymore. Trump is unreliable. We have to build our European army. And this is all wrong. You know, I know Trump, he does not want to abandon NATO at all. What he says is, all the members should obey the rules and pay their 2% contribution. At the moment, of the 28 members, over 20 are not paying the 2%. They're not spending 2% on defence. And Trump, in my view, quite rightly is saying, come on, you know, whether you're small or big, 2% is a reasonable number to spend on defence. But you can see with Macron, you can see with that lovely man Verhofstadt, you can see with all of them, any excuse to get rid of America and to build their own Walter Mitty European army.
Now, of course, Nigel Farage didn't mention anything about Britain's potential involvement in with the EU Defence Union. He did use the word Defence Union at the very beginning of that, but his main focus, and he's absolutely right on this, is the issue of the 2% spend on defence and the question of where Trump stands on this. Now, we covered this in 2017 because, of course, it was Trump was at the inauguration for the new NATO headquarters in Brussels. There he is standing with Jens Stoltenberg beside a part of the World Trade Center, which had been brought over as a monument in the new NATO headquarters in Brussels. And really the key point here that Trump was making was pay up or else. He was saying, you'll remember this, Patrick, that you know, it's unacceptable for the US to be paying for all of Europe's defense these days. And at the time we said it was almost like we were sort of making a little bit of fun of him. It was almost like he was running a protection racket. But the fact is, the criticism of NATO in this, the suggestion from Macron that Europe needs to build its own defence because Trump is withdrawing from NATO. This is absolutely not the case. Now,
but Nigel Farage actually dodged the question from his listener.
Oh, he absolutely did.
It's
yes.
whether Britain was in or out of defence union, and Nigel very skillfully dodged the question and didn't answer whether Britain would be in or out of EU defence union. So he intentionally avoided having to answer that question.
He absolutely did, that's right. And so we probably are going to see a lot more of Nigel Farage during the general election, but defence is not an area that he's particularly keen to discuss, and it's pretty, although he was making a fair point in that little segment, it's pretty clear that he was using that fair point to swerve the bigger point of whether Britain was going to be involved in this issue or not. Now, let's move on to this briefly. This is Oxford Research Group. We've featured them a number of times in this program. They're pushing out lots of policy documents, particularly in the area of defence and foreign policy. Well, they now have released a new report on the Fusion Doctrine. Hashtag 5 steps to fusion is what they're talking about. And they're saying that this is on the basis of field research in Kenya and Mali, speaking to officials from the British Ministry of Defence, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the Department for International Development, as well as round tables with experts. They are arguing that as the Fusion Doctrine is rolled out in the UK, it also needs to be rolled out internationally, and that we've got to develop our relationships in the Sahel and East Africa. And this is fascinating because, of course, this is the key area that the European Union wants to get in with their defence. And in fact, this is mentioned in this report, as we'll come on to in a second. So they're suggesting 5-step approach to effective implementation of the Fusion Doctrine, whole of government thinking of Whitehall, implementation of the approach in countries the UK engages in, coordinating effectively with other international efforts, establishing meaningful dialogue with host countries, establishing meaningful dialogue with civil society, both internationally and at home. Fusion Doctrine, of course. Well, let's just remind you, everybody, what that's about. This originally came out in the National Security and Capability Review in 2018. Combined with a decline in trust in traditional sources of information and the era of so-called fake news, this means that the rules of the game have changed. The democratization of information the means to exploit it has allowed hostile actors to exert disproportionate influence in competition with the public interest. And therefore, because of that, the Fusion Doctrine means building a culture of common purpose across departments, which requires accountability to shift incentives and behaviours towards a more general whole-of-government approach. But it's not just a whole-of-government approach, it's also bringing in cooperation with NGOs, think tanks, and non-governmental organisations. But it's about developing a common narrative. It's about making sure that you've got common policies across all these various areas. It fits in very well with and is part of the rapid response mechanism of Theresa May and the other G7 countries. And of course, out of that comes the whole propaganda matrix, including the Integrity Initiative type operations and the type of propaganda that we're seeing with respect to Bolivia and a whole host of other things. So going back to the Oxford report, they're saying that the EU and its member states are projected to spend $8 billion on development assistance in the Sahel alone. Now, if we remember back to earlier this year, Ms. von der Leyen, who was then the defense minister of Germany, absolutely making the point that as far as the EU is concerned, the Sahel region is the most important, the southern neighbourhood, the most important area of development for the EU and its military and its foreign policy, because of course this is an area that NATO does not currently have an interest. NATO is much more interested in the eastern neighbourhood, and while the EU is certainly supportive of NATO's operations in the eastern neighbourhood, they are particularly wanting to look at the Sahel and so on. And they make the point in the report that the UK is a member of the Sahel Alliance, which was set up by France, Germany, and the EU to focus on increasing coordination between partners working in the region. And Patrick, one of the reasons that this is so important, I feel, is because we've got a number of different groups, international groups in Africa, in the Sahel region. We've got China working very hard there. Russia, we made the point that they've just signed a whole load of economic deals through their Sochi conference a week or so ago. And the EU is wanting to be in there, the UK wanting to be in there.
Saudi Arabia is very active there. Of course, they've bought the government in Sudan, and they're using their conscripts to fight the war in Yemen, among other things. So the Emirates and the Gulf states are also involved in there.
So I was interested to ask you what you thought about this, because when you've got major international powers all interested in the same bit of land, it has the potential to kick something off.
Well, it's already started. You just go back to 2010. This is, I believe, what Libya was about the takedown of Libya as a country. Look at it now, it's a failed state divided into 3 parts with about, I don't know how many international actors in there right now backing different sides of a civil war. And so what's happened during this period, millions or hundreds of thousands of migrants have been able to exfiltrate from sub-Saharan Africa and into Europe through Libya as one of the main corridors. So, and there's various implications to that in the future for those sub-Saharan countries. All their young, educated, university, ambitious young men are gone. They're in Europe right now. So if anything does kick off in terms of unrest, or domestic unrest, civil wars, etc., the sort of mobile, intellectual, young 22 to 32 demographic, a lot of that has been plucked out of the country and is in Europe, spread around Europe right now. That's the result of Libya. So, but you don't hear very many European officials talking about that.
No. But we have a major interest in the Sahel. Tony Blair, of course, also earlier this year saying that his organization is working extremely hard in the Sahel. This clearly is a major area of international focus at the moment, and we will be watching it very carefully.
It'll be a battleground.
Yes.
This will be a battleground in the future because it's the breadbasket. It'll be the new breadbasket of the world, but also in terms of rare earth minerals and deposits of lithium and cadmium. By the way, I didn't mention it, but one of the #1 deposits of lithium in the world is, guess which country? Bolivia. So there's that aspect
of it as well.
To this as well in terms of regime change and destabilizing areas.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you very much for joining me today, Patrick. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back at the same time as usual on Wednesday. Hope to see you then. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.